Good evening, participants. We're going to go ahead and get this webinar started this evening. I hope everyone is staying dry and safe. I know that there's some weather across the country right now in certain places. I hope everyone's doing well. We're going to go ahead and start this evening and discuss a couple things. Tonight's webinar is going to be a little bit different. We've had some requests previously to engage both the older and the younger participants at the same time, and this is a topic that lends itself well to that. So with tonight, we're going to have two options. So the first option for participants is the Feedlot health basics. What's some of the health protocol that goes on before the feedlot and at the feedlot, and how does that interact with the calf's overall health? That'll be by Dr. Vander Ley. Some of you, this name may sound familiar. He also gave this talk last year. So this is actually his recorded webinar from last year. So you will notice that if you are listening to this webinar, that when Dr. Vander Ley starts talking, he's going to ask you to interact some. Now, it's a recorded webinar, so you are not actually going to be able to interact with him in this way. Just a heads up, you do not have to do the things that he's asking you to do. This would be a good option for some of you, the younger participants particularly. Anyone that maybe doesn't have as much experience, that would also be a good option for you all. Let me make sure my screen is here that you all can see it. Okay, there we go. So that'll be our first option. And so to engage in the first option, all you're going to do is you're just going to keep watching this webinar. You're not going to worry about doing anything different than normal. Now, our second option is going to focus on PAP, so Pulmonary Arterial Pressure. And this is also what leads to what's known as brisket disease or feedlot heart disease, depending on the age of the animal and where they're at. They call it by different names. And this one is going to be a bit different in that this is kind of a mini seminar. And so you all should have gotten an email here in the last 15 minutes or so from me giving the assignment out in the rubric. You'll notice if you get in and open that your assignment on the second page of that has some specific links in there that you can put in some different sources that will help you with this topic. And so we have, flip to the next page. Well, let me talk about the assignment a little bit more, and then we'll get into those. So for this month, the assignment's going to be a more traditional format. Last month was a pretty different and fun assignment, and next month's topic lends itself to a little more of an interactive assignment. So this month's going to be more traditional. Either you're going to write a paper or you can prepare a video. And we've given you some prompt ideas in that assignment email, but you can also be creative and choose a different topic that you would like to discuss in relation to either the feedlot health with Dr. Vander Ley or the brisket disease topic that you're also going to be able to study on your own if you'd like. So if you are choosing to do option 2, these are the sources that we have given you specifically, not that you can't go out and find other ones, but these are ones that we have went through and we've looked at and that we think are of good value and good use to you all. So the first one you see here, we were hoping that Lane Giess, who works here at ASA, was going to be able to hop on and give us a brief introduction this evening, but he got tied up and is not able to do so. It's not a big deal. Hopefully we can get something from him a bit later to maybe send out for those of you that are hoping to do that. Now, the next one is going to be sire differences within heart and heart fat score in beef cattle by Isabella Kukor, I believe is how you say her last name. And this is a YouTube video, and it's about 30 minutes long, if my memory serves me. And that one gives a very good introduction to the basics of this topic, as well as going more in depth, providing some nice visuals to look at. It's a really nice, well-rounded video to watch. Then additionally, you see this PAP, HMD, and FHD alphabet soup of what we know and don't know. And this is by Milt Thomas from Colorado State University as well. This will take, the link that's provided for that one will take you to a web page that belongs to BIF, Beef Improvement Federation. And this was from a talk that he gave a couple years ago with that. And so you do not have a video of this, but his slides are there as well as the audio. And Milt does a very good job of walking through this at a very understandable level and talking through some big pieces of the topic. I would recommend that one if you have the time as well. And then lastly, for those of you that prefer the hard paper product to look at, to read, to pull information or quotes from, the last source that you'll be sent out is this Emerging Disease, and that's actually by Dr. Vander Ley as well. And so that one is just 3 or 4 pages, and you'll be able to go through that one if you would like as well. It's nothing too crazy, but again, it is a paper copy for you all to look at for some of this information. So with that said, you all now have the option to choose and you can do both if you'd like. You're welcome to listen to Dr. Vander Ley's talk now, and then if you want to go back and listen to some of the other sources as well for the option 2, you can make that choice. Again, I would probably recommend that juniors are going to enjoy the first option a little bit more, but they may enjoy looking at some of the brisket disease stuff as well. Intermediates and seniors, you all can make your choice which one you prefer, which topic sounds a bit more interesting to you. And so we're going to ask that if you want to listen to Dr. Vander Ley's talk, that you go ahead and stay on. And if you feel like you're comfortable with the beginning health topic and you would like to just dive into some of this PAP brisket disease, feedlot heart disease topic, and you'd like to get going on some of that information, you're welcome to go ahead and hop off now. And again, those links and those sources should be in your email with your assignment. So I'm going to give everyone a minute now to discuss, and they can decide what they want to do. And we'll give you just a minute to hop off if you want to hop off, or stay on, and we'll start that webinar in just 1 minute. And I guess for some of you, it might help too if I explain the option 2 a touch more. I didn't go into a lot of depth, but this topic is talking about a condition that leads the heart and the lungs to have some serious issues. The heart walls thicken. They're not able to do their job as well. And this is really impacted by the amount of fat in an animal's body. And it's also impacted by the elevation that an animal lives at. So whether they're high in the mountains or they're closer to sea level makes a big difference in this as well. So if this is something that sounds like it might be interesting, it's a fun topic and an interesting topic that's gotten a lot of interest in the last number of years, you're, again, welcome to do either of these options as you see fit. But we are going to go ahead and start sharing Dr. Vander Ley's video from last year. And just a reminder that you do not have to interact as he's asking you to do. This was a previously recorded webinar. Also, before I start playing this, I should have also reminded you that to listen to this, if you happen to be on a phone, you will want to make sure that if you're playing this on a computer, that your computer speakers are on and up, because that's how this audio will come through. Just a heads up.
All right, very good. If you guys have questions as we go along, I think there's a spot where you can raise your hand. Just go ahead and do that. If you really have a question and somebody doesn't see your hand or something like that, you can interrupt me. That's okay. I'm going to give you permission to do that. I'm also going to ask you to do something that you might not get asked to do every time, which is get a phone out. And I want you to go to a website called Slido. You can go to slido.com or just Google Slido. And I'll show you what we're going to do. So you just introduced where you're from. Now I'm going to double check you. So if you have a device, a phone, an iPad, you might be able to do it on the same screen as your computer, but that's probably going to be kind of tough. And just go to slido.com, and where it says event code, put in ASA. And I've got a few questions as we go along here. If this doesn't work very good, I might just randomly ask you the same questions that I'm going to put in this thing. But I'll give this just a second for those who might be able to find a phone or an iPad or something to go to slido.com and put in ASA, and you should be able to answer this question. It should be the first thing that pops up. There we go. We got one person in. Unfortunately, I can't remember well enough to know which of you is from Chatfield, Minnesota. My memory isn't that good. There we go. We're probably going to have some duplication here too, I'm guessing. That's all right. All right, if you get a chance, I'm gonna go on, but if you get a chance, go ahead and log into that slido.com and use the event code ASA. So here's a question. This is a little bit like a quiz. Do any of you know what the most common disease of feedlot cattle is? What we're going to talk about today is keeping cattle healthy in the feedlot. We're going to talk about a lot of things, but first we got to decide what makes cattle sick, or how do they get sick in the feedlot. So you should let's see. I think as soon as someone starts, you guys see that one? Or anybody can unmute and just tell me what the answer is. I think it's multiple choice. Let me see. Yeah, it might not work. Hey, my technology fails. Can you guys, somebody want to just unmute and tell me what the most common disease is? Well, there's the answer. The most common disease of feedlot cattle is pneumonia. And the latest information we have from the USDA says that of all the feedlot cattle in the US, so there's approximately 30 million cattle in the US that are in feedlots at any one time. And of those 30 million animals, about 16% of them are going to get pneumonia in the feedlot. And of those cattle that get pneumonia, about of the total of the 30 million, about 1.6% die. So if anybody wants to do a little bit of math sometime, take 0.016 times 30 million and see how many animals die of pneumonia in the feedlot. It's a big, 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 big problem for the US beef production system. And we're going to talk today a little bit about why pneumonia happens in feedlot cattle. So to do that, I'm going to tell a story. And this story is a tale of two calves. You get extra credit if you know what story what piece of famous or what famous book I'm playing off of here. You can put that in the chat if you want to show off a little bit. But I'm going to tell you the story of two calves, and I think it's funny because I misspelled tail. But once you get to be where I am, I went to school as long after high school as I did when I was going to grade school and high school. You get to be kind of a nerd, and this is funnier than it probably needs to be. So hopefully you're laughing a little with me. But I'm going to tell you the story of two different calves, and what that story is really meant to do is to demonstrate, illustrate, kind of describe why some cattle get sick and why others don't. So the first thing, somebody's got to unmute and tell me, what is the job description of a cow?
Stay alive and deliver meat to the consumer.
Well, that's pretty good. I do like it when they stay alive. That's better. Veterinarians we get used to looking at sick things, and sometimes we have to look at the dying ones. So I like the staying alive. You're 100% right. We have to deliver some meat to the consumer. What do we use, or what's the resource that we convert into that meat using a cow?
Grass.
You're right. And sunshine, right? So basically what we're doing with a cow is turning sunshine into protein. It's pretty cool, right? So somebody gets extra credit. I know this is the American Simmental Association, but somebody gets extra credit if they can tell me. This is not real extra credit. I don't really have that kind of power. That's up to Bailey, but somebody gets fake extra credit if you can tell me what breed of cow this one is.
A white park.
That is a white park. My first boss used to call those the tar bucket calves, or the tar bucket cows. Looks like they took a drink out of a tar bucket. So the reason that's important is because there's lots of ways that we can convert sunshine into beef. And one of the things that we're gonna tell this story tonight, but I want you to remember that there's lots of ways to do things. And just because they don't always work out the way we want them to every time, there's still good things about the way those ways work out. So we'll cover that more as we go along. But I'm going to tell you the story of these two calves. We got this one little calf right here on the left. His name's Bubba. Somebody want to chime in and tell me what breed he is?
Brahma.
He's pretty much straight Brahman, straight Brahma calf. That's not even a mix. Pretty good little hump on there, lots of leather. I don't know if you guys have ever heard those growl. I know we got somebody from Alabama, so you've probably heard the Brahma growl. I think it's kind of cool, but those are also athletic animals, and I'm not a big fan. I was born in the north, so we have these kind. I don't know what breed this cow is. She's a red one. That could be a lot of things, but this calf right here, his name is Haas, and I'm going to tell you the story of these two calves and how their life makes it more or less likely that they're going to develop pneumonia, or I'll call it respiratory disease, or sometimes I'll call it BRD, which is bovine respiratory disease. You'll hear me use those words interchangeably pretty much all night long. So I'm going to tell you the story of Bubba first. So I completely made this story up, and because you guys have to give credit, I have to give credit. I didn't do a real great job, but all the pictures in my presentation tonight, except for one, I just searched what I was looking for on Google. So these are all just off Google images. But these two calves were born in two very different places. Bubba was born down here in Louisiana. I'm going to say that he's from in the neighborhood of like Lake Charles, Louisiana, if you want to go look up a town. And Haas was born up here in Montana, Powderville, Montana. And I kind of like Powderville because my brother worked on a ranch there for a few years, and it's a really cool place. They're like 30 miles from a post office that they put out there just so they could get their mail once in a while. So Bubba's from Lake Charles, Louisiana, or the kind of the southeast. And trying to remember who's from Alabama, but don't take offense. I'm not knocking the southeast entirely, but there's a lot of calves that you'll find out are a little troublesome for feedlots that come out of the southeast. I bet yours aren't those. And then Haas is going to be from Montana. So this is where Bubba was born. This is a swamp. But what's really important about Bubba's birthplace is that this is not very managed. You know, if you think about a lot of the ways that we raise cattle, we have really nice pastures. We spend a lot of time making fences for them. Some people in parts of the country are going to do things like clip the pastures to make sure the grass quality stays really good. They'll in other parts of the country, they might plant windbreaks or something like this. But here in Louisiana, this calf was basically born in a swamp. And he was born in this swamp because Bubba's owner isn't a cow farmer full time. Like, he's not a rancher. He's actually, I got him as a crop scout here. I did that because I have a roommate from undergrad that does this. He spends all day catching bugs in soybean fields, which kind of sounds like fun. But Bubba's owner doesn't raise cattle for a living. So he's got a few cows out on a little piece of ground that he owns that he wouldn't do anything otherwise. Maybe he would go out there and hunt, or maybe they would camp on that piece of ground, or they would do something out there. But he's not doing it for a living. He's got these cattle, and they're kind of like a savings account. So when Bubba's owner has a problem with the washing machine breaking, or the car breaks down, or they need some new tires, or it's time to buy some Christmas presents, Bubba's owner might go out and pick out Bubba and a few of his, closest in size and age buddies from that particular place. And it's important to point out that in the United States, the average herd size is probably somewhere between 30 and 50 animals. So if they're having calves out in the swamp, they never take the bull in, so they're having calves all year long. There's always going to be a few calves ready, but they're never going to have a lot ready. So out of 50 cows that have a few calves, or maybe they have 40 calves running around, there might be 2 or 3 that are ready to go to the sale barn at any one time. So they might go to the sale barn and get sold, maybe one at a time. In the Southeast, it's a little more common to have them sold 1 at a time, 2 at a time. And usually it's because Bubba's owner needed money to buy a washing machine or to fix the car. And I always call this the ancient savings account. So if you're familiar with the Bible, when Abraham and all those other characters in the Bible, when they were considered wealthy, they always had lots of animals. And that's kind of what Bubba's owner's doing here. He's got some sort of money in the bank because he's got calves out in his pasture. Not doing a lot to them, not really making them better necessarily, but they're out there and they're worth something. So the problem with what happens is that there's a whole bunch of stuff that Bubba hasn't experienced yet. And one of those is that feedlots, when they buy calves, they have pens that hold anywhere from 50 to, I've heard of pens as big as 600 animals. And feedlots want to feed groups of cattle that are very similar to each other. That's important in a feedlot because, first of all, if calves are different sizes, they don't compete. Some of the calves are going to get out-competed at the bunk. In other words, the big calves are going to get all the feed and the little ones aren't going to get very much, which means the big ones get bigger, small ones stay really small or maybe even get sick. And they also want to sell that whole pen of cattle as fast as they can when they're ready. So they want them all to get ready at the same time and then be able to market them all in one bunch. So they want to empty those pens out so they can put a new set of calves back in their place. Because you got to remember, feedlots are kind of like a hotel. They don't get paid if nobody's staying there, and they want to have that hotel as close to full as possible. So if they're pulling just a few calves at a time out of a pen because the rest of them aren't ready yet, they're not maximizing the occupancy of the feedlot. So they're not maximizing the amount of money they can make in a feedlot. So what happens when Bubba and a couple of his buddies from his place get sold is they have to be added to groups of calves to make a pen size, or even at this stage, more importantly, they have to be able to make a truckload. So does anybody want to chime in and tell me how many 500-pound calves will fit on a semi-truck? Anybody know the answer to that question or want to take a shot at it?
100?
That's really good. That's perfect. Semis can hold between 48 and 52,000 pounds. So if they're 500-pound calves, you can put 100 of them on there and have 50,000 pounds. Great job. So the problem that you run into is that Bubba and his couple of friends from his herd get bought and added to 97 other calves that maybe came to the sale barn 1, 2, 3 at a time as well. So did anybody get sick, like get a cold, or hopefully you didn't get COVID? That's kind of happening this year. But did anybody get like a cold or get like the stomach flu after Christmas? That's what we call commingling. So what happens when you put a whole bunch of people, or animals in this case, together that haven't been together before, is they each have their own little set of bugs. So one calf has got a few, maybe Mannheimia is one of the important bacteria that causes pneumonia in calves. So maybe one calf has pneumonia and another calf is shedding bovine viral diarrhea virus, and another calf's got some BRSV. And when they come together, they all trade their bugs around and they start getting sick. The other problem with putting a whole bunch of new calves together is it's kind of like going to a new school or going to a place where there's a whole bunch of people that you don't know. They have to rearrange the social structure. So they got to figure out, well, maybe, like, I don't know if you can see my pointer here, but this little calf, this is a kind of a special group of calves because they belong to a friend of mine. They actually came from southern Missouri. And these are not real high quality calves. These are some sale-born calves from southern Missouri. And this one right back here, my friend's daughter named him Woolly Bully. Woolly Bully, I think, was the top dog where he came from, but he had to kind of go down the pecking order a little bit. And what happens when they do that is they kind of fight, but most importantly, they get stressed. When we talk about stressed, it's like that kind of anxiousness that you might feel. It's also they don't know what to eat. We'll talk about that more as we go along. But most importantly, they're stressed and they're sharing these bugs. So their immune system isn't working as well, or it starts to get kind of downgraded, and they're starting to share bugs that are going to make them sick, which is when they really need their immune system to work as well as possible. So the next thing is they get put on this truck with 97 new friends, or Bubba might have 99 new friends as they get on this truck. They actually are really not ready to go to the feedlot yet. If these calves straight from Louisiana go to the feedlot, they're not really ready yet. And that's, so when I talk about unmanaged, anybody know what I might mean by that? Like what things might not have been done to these calves that might make it better when they get to the feedlot?
They haven't been vaccinated yet.
Probably not. What do we often do to male calves? Well, we almost always do it to male calves in the U.S.
Castration.
We castrate them. Do you think that if Bubba was born in the swamp and the first time his owner really interacted with him was to load him on the trailer, take him to the sale barn, do you think he's been castrated? Probably not. Are Brahma cattle, do they have horns? This is a little breed question. The answer is yeah.
It
Brahma
depends.
cattle. Most Brahma cattle have the natural ones are horned. You can breed other breeds into them and make them polled, but most Brahma cattle are horned. So he's probably got a set of horns on him. So he's when we get what we want in a steer that comes to the feedlot is we want a steer that's castrated, probably vaccinated, probably dehorned. The other problem is that when Bubba got sold, he lost his mama, right? He wasn't weaned before he got sold. So now Bubba's got a few problems, right? He's not really ready for the feedlot. He's got 99 new friends. He lost his mama, which means he lost his best friend in the world. And he lost his source of nutrition, right? He doesn't have milk anymore. And now he's got to get on a truck and go somewhere. And because he's not really ready for the feed yard, sometimes we take these calves straight to the feedlot, and a lot of them would get sick. But a lot of times this type of calf like Bubba is going to get put together, and they're going to go to what's called a stalker or a backgrounder. I don't know how many of you are familiar with those, but stalkers and backgrounders play a really important role in getting cattle ready to go to the feedlot. And I'm going to send Bubba from his home in Louisiana to a stalker operation in the Flint Hills of Kansas. So the Flint Hills of Kansas is famous for running stalker cattle and turning them into yearlings. This is kind of what the Flint Hills look like. It's probably too many trees for the real Flint Hills, but this is a picture of the Flint Hills. And when Bubba gets here, he's going to have all those important things happen. So he's probably going to lose his testicles, which Bubba's probably 400 to 600 pounds, and being castrated at 600 pounds is really, really hard on a calf. That's a pretty major surgery at that point. He's also going to, if he's got horns, he's going to either have them tipped, they're going to take the ends off, or he's just going to get completely castrated. Also, very, very stressful, and it causes a wound that has to heal, just like castration. And Bubba's probably also going to get a vaccine or two, or maybe several. And this might be new information, but vaccines are kind of stressful. So have you ever had like your measles vaccine or gotten a flu shot and felt kind of tough for a few days? That's your immune system kicking in. And if they're already kind of stressed and not doing so well, a vaccine can be kind of hard on them too. So at the stalker, he's going to be castrated, dehorned, vaccinated, and he's going to spend a few months just eating grass. And he's going to turn into what we call a yearling, which means he's probably going to weigh 750 to 850 pounds. And then he's going to go on one more truck ride. I'm going to send him to Amarillo, Texas. A lot of Flint Hills cattle go to the feed yards that are in the south, kind of the south high plains, so the panhandle of Texas, the panhandle of Oklahoma, kind of southwest Kansas, and southeast Colorado. So this is one of the big cattle feeding parts of the country. One of the biggest feedlots I've ever been to is right, I'm trying to see if I could see it. It's right in this area somewhere. There's a feed yard that has 120,000 head capacity. But I'm going to send him to Amarillo, which is kind of the classic southern feedlot city, and we're going to put him in a feedlot there. And hopefully the stocker did a good job, and Bubba stays with the group of cattle that he's been living with for the last few months at the stocker when he gets sold, and he'll go into this feedlot with his buddies, his hunter buddies that he got bought with, and everything will be fine from there. But it's possible that if they're different enough, the weights are too different. So we talk about spread. If the weight spread is too big, they might sort the light ones and put them in one pen with other light calves, and sort the heavy ones and put those in another pen. Because again, they want to make sure that those cattle are as similar as possible. Because you can see in this picture that these calves in a feedlot, and I don't know if you guys have been to the feedlot at the zoo, the calves in this picture are really, they're in there tight. And if one calf is little, he's going to really struggle to get his part of the feed. So what's happened to Bubba is that he's had a lot of challenges. So we're going to talk about a little different story now. This is, we're going to talk about Haas, the calf from Powderville, Montana. So this is Haas's birthplace. It's a little different. I should do a better picture of getting the fences in here, but you can see that this is, this is ranch country right here, wide open, probably Missouri River breaks. Looks like maybe they got a little center pivot irrigation down there, but this is managed. Like this range is managed to make it as plentiful as possible for Haas's mom, so that he grows up to be a big calf. But what might be almost as important as the place he's born, it's the owners, it's Haas's owners. So you can tell maybe from, you shouldn't judge people by looking at them too much, but compared to Bubba's owner, who we know isn't a rancher, these people are ranchers. They have cattle and they keep cattle and they raise cattle for a living. So they depend on raising good cattle and selling them to make enough money to live. So these are dedicated folks. They got their horses and their ropes, and it looks like they got a cattle dog. Again, I just picked this picture off Google, so I don't really know these people, but I can imagine them being good ranchers. Really important stuff happens to Haas when he's really early. So in the western part of the country, here in Nebraska, Montana, South Dakota, and actually lots of places, there's two different names I've heard for this. So some people call it like branding. They'll describe branding, which means they're actually gonna brand the calves as a sign of ownership. Parts east, I hear people talk about like marking time, or they'll call it branding time, or it's like pre-breeding. A lot of calves will get worked pre-breeding. But what happens at this point, this calf's probably only maybe 1-2 months old, is he's already being worked. He's already being managed. He's getting a vaccine, probably, maybe a few vaccines. If he wasn't castrated when he was born, that's probably going to happen now. Most people who raise cattle for a living are trying really hard not to have to dehorn them, so they're breeding them to be polled. So a whole bunch of stuff is going right for Haas when he's really little, and his owners are working really hard to make sure that they can make money on Haas. They want to sell Haas and all the other calves on their ranch, which might be a big bunch of them. Maybe they have a few hundred cows, so they can sell a few hundred calves a year. And all those calves are going to be born in a really short calving season. So instead of having a few calves born every month, Haas and all of his calf mates are going to be born probably in 60 days or less. So there's going to be a really narrow birth window that's going to create a really even, similarly aged, similarly sized group of calves. And then Haas gets the benefit of some more important stuff like low stress weaning. So most ranches, no matter how they manage weaning, usually wean on the ranch if they're really trying to get the most profit out of their cattle. So they're going to separate those calves from the cows. If they really want to make that as stress-free as possible and keep it from creating problems like pneumonia and other things, they use low stress techniques. So what you're seeing here is that the calves and the cows are separated by a fence. There's a hot wire here so the calves can see each other. They can communicate however cattle communicate. And the only difference, they can still kind of have their relationship, but they can't have the milk anymore. And then they break the next bond of the relationship by moving the calves or the cows away. And we think that this makes weaning easier on the cattle. So this is good for Haas. By the time he's fully weaned, he maybe has stayed at the ranch 30 or 45 or 60 days or maybe even longer after he's been separated from his mother. And during that time, the ranch has probably fed him from a bunk. So he's learned a few things that are really important that Haas never had the chance to learn before he left his first home, right? These calves probably eat out of a bunk. They know how to drink out of a water tank. Haas was probably eating swamp grass and drinking milk and probably eating or drinking some water out of a scummy swamp pond and just really hadn't been exposed to anything that was going to be anywhere near what his life in the feedlot was going to look like. But Haas, he's already had access to all those things. So when he goes to the feedlot, he's going to know what to do. He's eaten out of a bunk. He's drank out of a water tank. Some people are going to use something like Superior Livestock Auction, but there's lots of options. I've just put this one here because it's an example. What this is, instead of Haas having to go through the sale barn where he meets all kinds of other calves, picks up their bugs, gives other calves his bugs, and meets a whole bunch of new friends, Haas is going to go, he's going to get shown on a video and bought by a feedlot without ever having to go to a sale barn. So he never has to meet a new set of friends. He's never going to trade his bugs with anybody but the calves he's been living with since he's been born. And once they're marketed, they're going to go straight to a feedlot. So in this case, I sent him to Greeley, Colorado, another big feeding area of the world. And I don't know if you saw the times, but Haas is only going 8 hours in total. Bubba had to travel almost 18 to get from where he was born to the feedlot that he finished in. So he's going to go to this nice feedlot, and he's basically going to go in there and get fed, and they're not going to have a lot of trouble with him because we've taken all that stress out. Now, if Haas gets there and the group that he's in is uneven, the feedlot might sort him and they might commingle him again. And in that case, the feedlot is going to create that stress when they show up. Feedlots also are better or worse in terms of how well they manage things like mud. You can see that there's not a lot of grass for the cattle to lay down on in this picture. So if it rains in a place like this, there's going to be mud. If it snows, there's going to be mud. And feedlots bedding is a real problem. It's hard to put in a feedlot pen, and it's hard to get it back out. So they really don't like to bed unless they absolutely have to. And they're going to push these calves really hard at the feedlot. So sometimes they can create the same types of problems that are created earlier by commingling. So just to kind of summarize what makes pneumonia happen, because that's what this whole story is about, is the things that really make it more likely that a calf's going to get pneumonia are: number one is weaning, abrupt weaning, so weaning straight onto the trailer without giving them a chance to acclimate. Two is commingling or mixing with lots of other cattle. And three is that surgical, like castration, dehorning stuff. If there were three things that I could get rid of in a calf's life to make him healthier, those three are almost always going to have the biggest bang for my buck. So when you talk about keeping calves healthy at the feedlot, there's a lot of stuff that they're doing just to make up for the fact that they haven't had those three advantages in their lives already. So you notice I haven't talked a whole lot about vaccination yet, and keeping cattle healthy at the feedlot can be really challenging because sometimes we don't know a lot about the calves that show up at the feedlot. Bubba's, they show up and they're on the feedlot will be the third owner of that calf, and there's not a lot of information that comes along. So I don't really know what happened to them. Haas, on the other hand, when those cattle get sold, a lot of times information does travel with them. In fact, a lot of Haas calf type owners or ranchers will retain ownership of their calves when they go to the feedlot so that they can benefit from that feeding process, which makes it even more important for them to do a good job of keeping their calves healthy. But one of the things that you might think after what the story that I've just told you is that respiratory disease or pneumonia in the feedlot is actually the fault of the cow-calf people. So the Bubba owners or could be if the cow-calf person did a bad job, it's their fault that the calf gets sick, not the feedlots. And sometimes that's probably true, but you also always have to remember that things work the way they do for a reason. And a lot of times in certain parts of the country, the land is set up that it's hard to have a big enough ranch to be able to make a living raising cattle. A lot of people don't have enough money to buy a ranch that's big enough to make a living, so they still have to do something else, and they have cattle on the side. And those are all good things. It's fun to have cattle, and I enjoy owning them, even though I don't have enough to make a living either. But the feedlots also can contribute or take away from the risk of a calf. So sorting is something I've mentioned a couple times. Feedlots can sort a lot, and they do it because it's good for them to have groups of calves that are very similar. But that sorting comes with the risk of introducing calves to new friends or commingling. So just a little statistic, the research that's out there, there's lots of it that says they're a little bit different numbers, but generally, if you put a calf in a group that has calves from more than 5 sources, he's 3 times more likely to get sick than if he's in a single source. So he came with all of his buddies from the same ranch. Same thing is true for castration. If you have to castrate a calf on arrival at a feedlot or at a stocker like this or like what Bubba had happen, he's 3 times more likely to get sick than if he is castrated at birth and shows up as a steer at the feedlot. And then the weaning stress is huge. There's one study that showed that weaning abruptly and taken straight to the feedlot increased respiratory disease or pneumonia like 5 times compared to animals that were weaned for 45 days on the ranch. So there's lots of stress that's put into play by those 3 things. And I'll tell you that no matter how much you vaccinate animals, you can't overcome that stress. I always think of vaccines like insurance, and you guys maybe understand insurance or not, but insurance is something you buy. It's like your parents have car insurance or home insurance. So if you have insurance on your barn, and if the barn burns down, the insurance company will give you enough money to build a new barn. The problem with insurance, though, is that it doesn't make up for all the sadness and stuff that comes when your barn burns down, and maybe you have a favorite calf or something that dies in the fire or something like that, right? It doesn't make up for that kind of stuff, and that's kind of a sad story. But that's kind of like vaccines. So if I give a vaccine to a calf and it gets exposed to a disease, the vaccine will make it more likely that it can fight that disease off. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the calf is going to be as good as it would be if it never was exposed in the first place. So I always want to make sure that I do everything to limit exposure. And sometimes the way we vaccinate calves in feedlots is we're doing all the wrong things and then hoping the vaccine bails us out. And that's not a very good system. So that a lot of calves get sick even though they get vaccinated. And it's because they've accumulated these other, we call them risk factors, so things that make it more likely that they'll become pneumonia cases when they get to the feedlot. So I asked you earlier what causes pneumonia in feedlot cattle, and you know that I'm not going to spend too much time on this one, but I didn't talk about a lot of bugs. I mentioned Mannheimia and BVD and BRSV. There's a whole list that we learned in vet school, and those are important. But the most important thing that I want you to know about what causes pneumonia in feedlot cattle is a couple things. Number one is usually it's what we would consider bad management, and it might be bad management when they're still on the calf or the cow-calf ranch. It also can be bad management at the feedlot. Another thing about pneumonia is that a lot of times the reason we have so much of it in the US is because we have a system where the people who have the calves born on their ranches don't necessarily own or feed those cattle themselves. So it's separated. And that has advantages, but one of the disadvantages is that cattle have to be sold and go to a feedlot. And that transportation and all the things I've described make it more likely that they'll get sick. And that's kind of the answer to this last question is whose fault is it that calves get pneumonia? And you guys don't have to chime in, or you don't have to fill out the Slido if you don't want to. But what I want you to understand is that it's our system's fault, and it could be people who don't do a good job with their cattle. But if you want to raise cattle that do stay healthy, you need to make sure that you're doing everything you can to minimize those risk factors. So you may or may not be able to raise enough cattle to sell a truckload. A lot of people can't do that. So sometimes that's just something we can't manage. But you can vaccinate them, which will help. You can buy the insurance in case you can't stop the exposure. It's really important to do things to those calves like castrate and dehorn if they need it when they're little, because it's so much better for them and keeps them healthy when they get older. And then one of the most valuable things that you can do if you own cows is to wean those calves on your place before you sell them. It makes it much more likely that when that calf gets sold and goes to his next home, wherever it is, that he won't get sick, and hopefully he stays alive and makes a lot of beef for us. So with that, I would love to answer any questions that you guys have. And or I can answer any questions that you have about this or anything else that you might wonder about relative to cattle or sheep. I've got sheep too.
Dr. Vander Ley, I've got a question. This is Jackie. That I've been thinking about just while I listen to you talk. And, you know, for instance, it's interesting that castration would have such castration at the feed yard would have such an impact on the health of that calf. And a number of the other things that you talked about, to me, the common theme is stress. So everything that you can do to minimize stress upon entry to the feed yard seems like it's really going to play in your favor. So is that just the animal's able to react better if it's not stressed, if it's exposed to some, you know, pathogens that could cause pneumonia?
Yep, that's 100% correct. So it's kind of interesting. You're 100% right about stress. So stress is a hard thing to understand until you've experienced it, right? So I don't even have a good example for this, but stress is all those things that make a calf feel uncomfortable in its mind, feel uncomfortable physically. It's all those things added together. It's pain. It's having to recreate a social structure with a whole bunch of new calves, so they got to figure out who's the top dog and who's not. So all those stressors added up come with the increased risk of more exposure to pathogens. So when we talk about commingling, the stress is increased because they're commingled, but also it's more likely that they're going to be exposed to those pathogens, those viruses and bacteria, and they're less able to fight them off. It's kind of like if any of you that are listening have ever gotten really short on sleep, and a couple days later you get sick. Being short on sleep is a stressor, and if you're short on sleep, your body doesn't have time to rejuvenate and to keep the immune system really active. And that's why if you lose a lot of sleep for several days in a row, you're up till 3 o'clock playing on the Xbox with your friends or something like that. You do that for a few days in a row without getting enough sleep, and you're going to get sick. Same thing is true for calves. But if we do a good job of removing that stress, so we wean them on the ranch so that we slowly and carefully break the bond with the cow, so that that's not a big stressor, and we castrate them at birth, so that's not a big stressor, and we try to ship them in as big a groups as we can so that they don't have to have all that commingling stress, then it's also less likely that they're going to be exposed. But even if they are, they have an immune system that's working much better so they can handle it.
I've got a question too, if you don't mind, Dr. Vander Ley.
Sure.
So you heard the assignment that these kids are going to have to do. And so obviously we focused more on the feeder side of things. And so they got a lot of information from you just now on that. But one thing I also wanted to think about too, and you can help me out with this, is whether it be feeder calves or beyond that into a cow-calf system or whatever, what are some factors that maybe producers or just people in general don't think about all the time as being contributing to the health of a calf, whether it be something as simple as clean water or something as dynamic as genetics? What are some things that maybe we don't think about, beyond just some of the normal stuff that we think of on the forefront of our minds, the vaccinations, the weanings, and those are obviously important, but what are some little things that also play into keeping our calves and our cows healthy?
I think my opinion is that there are lots of little things that can play a role. So you've mentioned a couple things, right? Like clean water. I'll add good nutrition. And good nutrition is kind of a funny thing in calves, because we think about good nutrition as having lots to eat or maybe really good growth. And sometimes for a calf that's going to make the transition, it's better if they're a little bit thin, not as fat when they make the transition. We know that calves that are carrying extra condition going to the feedlot don't do as well. And nobody is exactly sure why that's true, but good nutrition means that they're growing muscle and bone well, and they've got plenty of energy and protein to be able to run their immune system and still keep growing. Genetics are really interesting. I wish I could talk more about that. We're just on the science is on the edge of discovering all kinds of things genetically that drive health in some cases or illness in others. So we know that some of the research that some of my colleagues here and I do looks at some genetics that make cattle's hearts not work as well, and we don't exactly know how that all works yet, but we know that if cattle have some of these genetic changes, that they're more likely to develop pneumonia and heart failure in the feedlot. There's lots of things, but I think when I talk to people and when I look at the problems that show up, because I get to see a lot of feedlot cattle and I also get to talk to a lot of people at the cow-calf level, it's the fundamentals that are really important. It's making sure all the way back. So one of the most important meal of any cow or calf's life is colostrum. And there's an interesting study that was done that showed that colostrum meal plays a role in the success of that calf all the way to slaughter if it turns into a fat or finished calf. So starting with the really basic things like making sure cows are in good body condition so that they make really good colostrum, so that calf gets a really big dose of those antibodies from that cow when it's born. Removing those stressors, so castrating early, a good vaccine program, that your vet designs for you. So one of the things that I'm not going to tell you is which vaccines to use and which ones not to. No matter, we got people that are, you guys are from all over the US, and you have issues and problems where you are that someone 100 or 200 or 500 miles away won't have. So making sure that you're working with a vet is a really great way to keep your livestock healthy, because they can help you design a program that's right for your cattle. And then making sure, good nutrition for a calf usually means having really good forage available for the cow. Some people use crete feed and other things like that, but fundamentally, the best thing that we know works every time is to make sure we have really, really good forage for the cow. And then when we get to weaning time, making sure that that transition is, even if it's kind of abrupt at the ranch, that the calf has time to get ready. Those are the fundamentals. And I find that people that get worried about little things like the right minerals, which can be a problem if calves get short on minerals like copper or zinc or cobalt. Those have a lot of roles to play in the immune system. They can definitely be more likely to get sick, but most of the time that's not the problem. The problems are the big things that people aren't doing well. It's usually not the little ones. So I guess Bailey, until people are really good at the big things, I'll probably not worry about the little things as much. But the genetic stuff is coming, and it's really neat, and I'm really excited to see where that goes. And we keep learning more, so maybe I'll start worrying about the little things pretty quick.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. What we're going to do now is, as we wrap this up, I know we're getting close on our time. I know some of you may still have interest in knowing a bit more on some of the heart issues that we talked about early on. And as I talked about earlier, Lane Giess couldn't join us at the beginning. He got caught up with some other stuff, but he is on now. And so he's going to go ahead and just give a brief rundown on what some of this means. So Lane, whenever you are ready, you can go ahead and explain this topic a bit more to us.
Yeah. Can everybody hear me okay? I sure hope so. Bailey, thanks, and I apologize to everybody for being a little bit late. Got caught up here at NCBA and just totally lost track of time, and that's not fair to you guys, but really glad to visit with you a little today on PAP, specifically in its relationship with feedlot health and how some of these calves perform in the feedlot. And so kind of what I wanted to visit with you guys today a little bit about is some of the work that we're doing on terminal calves, where we're looking at basically the overall health. And PAP is a measurement that we take, and it's typically associated with high elevation cattle. So folks that are raising calves in Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, where they've got calves north of 5,000 feet of elevation, we are gathering a score on their blood pressure, because PAP stands for Pulmonary Arterial Pressure, basically. And so what that is we insert a meter that measures the amount of pressure in that pulmonary artery outside of the heart. And what we found in relation to high elevation cattle is that the PAP measurement itself can be a good indicator of whether cattle can survive in elevation, because a high blood pressure, right, that heart is pumping faster and harder and faster and harder, and the more and more that it pumps faster and harder, the weaker that heart gets. And so if we have cattle that have a genetic predisposition to lower PAP measurements, they can survive much more effectively and efficiently in altitude. And so what that means to cattle in low elevation is right now we don't know. We've got a huge issue with late stage feedlot death that I'm sure Dr. Vander Ley visited with you about, but what we've noticed is that even in low elevation cattle, there are differences in PAP measurements. But to the point where it's still fairly unknown and we're still investigating. So like Dr. Vander Ley said, we're still investigating the genetics part of this. One of the projects that we are working on, American Simmental Association, and we're partnering with Colorado State University, is we are gathering PAP measurements, so pulmonary arterial pressure on low elevation cattle. So these are cattle that are raised in Missouri or in Texas or in Kansas. And we're gathering their PAP measurements and we're following them all the way through harvest. And once those cattle have been harvested, we look at their hearts, and there's a numerical scale that we've associated with differences in the heart. So it's a 1 to 5 scale, where a 1 is a very nice, tight, appropriately shaped heart that hasn't had much pressure or hasn't had much fatigue associated with its lifespan. And on the flip side of that, a 5 would be a heart that is totally exhausted. And these are cattle that when we see cattle with a 5 heart score, these are cattle that are more than likely either already dead and never made it to the kill plant, or we're probably going to die within a couple of days going to the kill plant. So these are cattle where their blood pressure and their hearts have totally exhausted themselves. And one of the things that we're looking at is what is the relationship with low elevation PAP measurements and heart score and carcass data and all of those things. And we're gathering health data, so vaccination records, we're grabbing treatment records, and all of those things, days on feed, and we're trying to associate the relationships of all of these data points to see if there's any genetic predisposition to late stage feedlot death. So that's basically one of the updates that I wanted to give. But PAP is a really important measure because it's one that we use to look at how well those cattle are functioning internally and how their survivability, basically. So Bailey, that's about all I had. I don't have any slides, but I'd be happy to take questions because I know we've got a time limit on this. So happy to take any questions.
Let me switch this here and see if I can get it to where they have any questions they can ask. I'm not seeing any come through the chat. If anyone has a question, feel free to type that in. Not seeing anything come through on my side, but it looks like, yeah, it looks like that's a great explanation, Lane. Thank you for giving us that introduction so that these participants can decide if this is something they want to look at more for this month's assignment. And I know that you obviously have seen this a lot, and Colorado State has worked with this a lot. I don't know if you obviously have helped us this month with the assignment, and you recommended a video by Isabella Kukor. Is that how you would say that last name?
Yep, that's right. Yep, Isabella. Yep.
So if you want to so we have a source from her, we have a source from Milt Thomas, and we also have a source from Dr. Vander Ley that he put out as well. Do you maybe want to give a bit of a rundown for these kids on what they might be looking at for this assignment? They're doing either a write-up or a speech, and so they have to do this very traditional assignment this month. And just what are some things that they might specifically be interested in writing about and looking at more in this topic that might kind of strike a fancy for them they can dig a little deeper into?
Yeah, that's a great question. When it does come to heart score and PAP, I will say that this is really new stuff. It's really exciting, and there's not a lot out there. But the stuff that's out there is very good starting points to start asking some of your own questions. And so if I were in some of y'all's shoes, I would be thinking about, okay, so what's been done before and what questions have they asked? And given that knowledge, what questions could I ask, right? So for example, one of the, things that I just visited about is what is the relationship with PAP and heart score ability, right? And how does that translate to feedlot death? There's all kinds of things that can come from understanding, pulmonary arterial pressure or blood pressure in cattle. So, you could start to ask the question of, okay, so what does PAP do to carcass weights? What does PAP do to days on feed? All of those are really, really good questions, and there's probably a lot of questions out there that you could start to ask, and then start with your question, and then find some resources and meld them together and propose, a possible research project. That's what I would do. If that answers your question, Bailey.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, Lane, and thank you to all the participants who joined on this evening, and some of you that I know will be listening later this week. So we appreciate it very much, and you all have a good rest of your evening, and we'll let you go before we let this go too much longer. Thank you all. Have a good night.